12-year-old Jamal Williams sits frozen as flight attendant Heather Taylor forcibly removes him from first class, dragging him past staring passengers. "Your kind doesn't belong here," she hisses. Behind her, unnoticed, Jamal's father silently boards, wearing the airline's founder ID badge. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar while traveling. Now, let's see what happens when prejudice meets accountability in the most unexpected way. Malcolm Williams stood at the expansive windows of his corner office, gazing at the Skyline Airways jets taking off and landing at Atlanta International Airport. At 42, he had built the nation's fastest-growing airline from nothing but determination and vision after facing discrimination at every other major carrier. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very industry that had once told him he didn't belong now watched as his company revolutionized air travel. "Dad, is everything packed for tomorrow?" 12-year-old Jamal bounded into the office, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Despite attending one of Atlanta's most prestigious private schools, Jamal remained humble and grounded, qualities Malcolm had worked hard to instill. "Almost ready, son. I just need to sign these last reports." Malcolm smiled at his pride and joy. Jamal's intelligence and curiosity reminded him of himself at that age, except his son had opportunities he could only have dreamed of. Their trip to Washington, D.C. had been planned for months, a special father-son weekend at the National Air and Space Museum. Jamal's fascination with aviation matched his own, and Malcolm couldn't wait to show him the exhibits that had inspired his own career. "Remember, you'll be flying ahead on Flight 237, Malcolm explained. "I'll take Flight 241 right after my emergency board meeting. It's only 30 minutes later, so I'll meet you at the gate in D.C. Jamal's eyes widened with excitement. "So I'll be flying first class by myself?" Malcolm nodded. "It's time you experienced what your old man built. Just remember our rule. Never mention you own the airline," Jamal recited. "Watch and observe how people really act when they don't know who you are." This had always been Malcolm's philosophy. Anonymous visits to his own airline gave him insights no executive report ever could. Flight crews behaved differently when they knew the boss was watching. "That's my boy," Malcolm said proudly. "This is an important test of independence for you. I trust you completely." The next morning, Jamal arrived at the airport, check-in confirmation on his phone and excitement in his heart. At the premium counter, the agent barely glanced at him. "I think you're in the wrong line, young man. Economy check-in is over there," she said dismissively. "I have a first-class ticket," Jamal replied confidently, showing his phone. The agent's eyebrows rose slightly as she verified his booking. "Oh. I see. Very well then." She processed his boarding pass without another word, but her surprise was evident. At security, Jamal noticed the TSA agent examining his boarding pass longer than the white businessman ahead of him. "First class, huh? How'd you manage that?" the agent asked with a hint of suspicion. "My father bought the ticket," Jamal answered simply, remembering his dad's advice about maintaining dignity without escalation. As he waited at the gate, Jamal observed the business travelers around him, most engrossed in laptops or phones. A few glanced his way with curious expressions. He was used to being one of few black students at his school, but there, everyone knew his academic achievements. Here, they saw only what they wanted to see. A black kid who didn't fit their image of a first-class passenger. When boarding began, Jamal joined the first-class line. The gate agent checked his boarding pass twice before waving him through with a perplexed expression. He found his seat, 2A, window, and settled in, placing his backpack under the seat in front as his father had taught him. The cabin crew bustled about preparing for departure. Among them was Heather Taylor, a senior flight attendant with 20 years of experience. Skyline Airways had acquired her former airline 3 years earlier, and she prided herself on maintaining what she called standards. Tall, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a permanently fixed smile, Heather considered first class her domain. When she spotted Jamal sitting alone in 2A, her smile flickered momentarily. In her 2 decades of flying, she had developed certain expectations about who belonged in which cabin. Her mind immediately began constructing scenarios. He must be waiting for parents or perhaps in the wrong seat. Standards must be maintained, she murmured to herself as she approached him. After all, first-class passengers paid premium prices for a premium experience, and she believed part of that experience was a certain ambience. In Heather's mind, a child, particularly one like Jamal, disrupted that ambience. As other passengers boarded, Heather watched Jamal from the galley, noting how he sat quietly reading a book about aerospace engineering. Despite his perfect behavior, her discomfort grew. Something just wasn't right, and Heather Taylor had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of first-class propriety. Heather approached Jamal with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello there, sweetie. I think you might be confused about your seat. Can I see your boarding pass?" Jamal looked up from his book, recognizing the fake sweetness in her tone. He'd heard it before from teachers who assumed he couldn't possibly be gifted, from store clerks who followed him through aisles, from neighbors who questioned if he really lived in his upscale community. "I'm in the right seat," Jamal replied politely, pulling up his digital boarding pass. "Seat 2A. Heather examined the boarding pass on his phone, her expression shifting between disbelief and suspicion. "And how exactly did you get a first-class ticket, young man?" "My father purchased it," Jamal answered, maintaining the calm demeanor his father had taught him. "Never show them they've rattled you. Never give them the satisfaction. Is your father on board?" Heather glanced around the cabin, clearly expecting to see an adult claiming responsibility. "He's taking a later flight. I'm traveling alone." Jamal's voice remained steady, though his heart rate had accelerated. By now, several first-class passengers were watching the interaction. A middle-aged white businessman in an expensive suit, Andrew Peterson, according to his frequent flyer luggage tag, caught Heather's eye and raised his eyebrows meaningfully. "Well," Heather said, her voice louder now, "there seems to be some confusion. First-class tickets are quite expensive. Perhaps there was a mistake in the booking system." "There's no mistake," Jamal insisted, feeling his cheeks grow warm as more passengers turned to stare. "My father booked this seat specifically." From across the aisle, a Latina woman in her 30s, Lisa Rodriguez, looked up from her laptop. "Is there a problem? The kid has a boarding pass for that seat, right?" Heather ignored her, leaning closer to Jamal. "Listen, honey, sometimes the computer makes errors. Why don't I help you find your actual seat in economy? I'm sure there's been a mix-up. But my boarding pass says." "Young man," Heather interrupted, her voice taking on an edge, "I've been flying these skies for 20 years. I know when something isn't right, and this isn't right. I think that ticket may not be legitimate." The implication hung in the air. Theft. Fraud. The assumptions behind her words were crystal clear to everyone listening. Andrew Peterson cleared his throat. "Flight attendant, if there's an issue with proper seating, perhaps you should handle it. Some of us paid a premium for a peaceful cabin experience. Lisa Rodriguez closed her laptop with a snap. Excuse me? The child has a valid ticket. What exactly is the issue you're referring to? Heather straightened her uniform jacket. Ma'am, I'm simply following protocol. If there's any question about the legitimacy of a boarding pass, we must investigate. What question? Lisa challenged. His pass scanned properly at the gate, didn't it? Jamal reached for his phone. I can call my dad right now. He can explain. Please put your phone away, Heather said sharply. We're in active boarding. Cell phone use is restricted during boarding procedures. This was a lie, and several passengers knew it, but no one except Lisa seemed willing to contradict the flight attendant. For security reasons, Heather continued, her voice taking on an official tone, I need to ask you to gather your belongings and come with me. We'll sort this out in economy class. Jamal felt his throat tighten. This wasn't supposed to happen. His father had trusted him to handle this flight independently. Now he was being humiliated in front of a cabin full of adults, most of whom were watching with either indifference or barely concealed approval. But I didn't do anything wrong, Jamal said, his voice smaller now. No one said you did, honey, Heather replied, her condescension transparent. But protocols exist for everyone's safety. She extended her hand toward his backpack. Now, let's get your things. With burning eyes, Jamal slowly gathered his book and backpack. The injustice of it all made his hands shake slightly, but he refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Heather took his arm, a touch too firmly, and began guiding him toward economy class. Right this way. As they moved through the cabin, Jamal felt the weight of every stare. Some passengers looked uncomfortable, averting their eyes when he glanced their way. Others watched with open curiosity, as if witnessing an entertaining scene in a movie. A few nodded slightly, as if Heather was performing a valuable service by removing him. Lisa Rodriguez stood halfway out of her seat. This isn't right, she said loudly. Someone should call the captain. Ma'am, please remain seated during boarding, Heather replied without looking back. As they reached the curtain separating first class from economy, Jamal felt a mixture of emotions he couldn't fully process. Humiliation, anger, sadness, and a deep disappointment that his special trip was being ruined before it even began. His father had trusted him to handle this flight alone, and now he was being paraded through the plane like a criminal. Your kind doesn't belong here, Heather whispered, just loud enough for Jamal to hear as they passed through the curtain. The words hit him like a physical blow. Your kind. There it was, the real reason behind everything. Not protocols, not security, not legitimate concerns about his ticket. Just two words that revealed what she really saw when she looked at him. Malcolm Williams boarded Flight 237 through the jet bridge, his mind still processing the quarterly figures he'd just presented to the board. He had managed to catch the flight after all, planning to surprise Jamal with his early arrival. As he stepped onto the plane, he immediately sensed the tension in the air, that unmistakable electricity that signaled conflict. Flight attendants were huddled near the galley, whispering urgently. Passengers in first class seemed uncomfortable, some craning their necks to look toward the economy section. Something was happening, and Malcolm's instincts, honed through years of corporate leadership, told him it wasn't good. Captain Daniel Brooks emerged from the cockpit for his routine pre-flight cabin check when he spotted Malcolm. The captain's eyes widened in recognition, and he changed direction immediately. Mr. Williams. We weren't expecting you on this flight, Captain Brooks said, extending his hand. Last-minute change of plans, Daniel, Malcolm replied, still observing the unusual atmosphere. "Is everything all right?" The cabin feels tense. Before the captain could answer, Malcolm's attention was drawn to movement at the rear of first class. A flight attendant was escorting someone toward economy, someone small with a familiar backpack. Malcolm's body went rigid as recognition dawned. "Is that my son?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Captain Brooks followed his gaze, and his face drained of color. "Sir, I had no idea." Malcolm was already moving, his long strides carrying him swiftly through the first-class cabin. Passengers watched with renewed interest as the tall, imposing figure in an impeccable suit cut through their midst with purposeful energy. He reached the dividing curtain just as Heather and Jamal were about to enter the economy section. "Jamal," he called, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. Both Heather and Jamal froze, turning simultaneously. Jamal's face transformed from shame to relief in an instant. "Dad!" Malcolm's eyes took in everything, his son's rigid posture, the flight attendant's grip on Jamal's arm, the watching passengers. His expression remained calm, but anyone who knew him would recognize the controlled fury behind his eyes. "What's happening here?" Malcolm asked, his tone deceptively mild. Heather blinked rapidly, her hand dropping from Jamal's arm. "Sir, we were just resolving a seating misunderstanding." "Are you this child's father?" "I am," Malcolm confirmed, placing a protective hand on Jamal's shoulder. "And I'd like to understand what misunderstanding required my son to be physically removed from his assigned seat in first class." Heather's professional smile snapped back into place. There appeared to be some confusion with his boarding pass. "I was simply following protocol to ensure." "What protocol specifically?" Malcolm interrupted, his voice still measured but with an edge that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. "Please cite the exact Skyline Airways policy that instructs flight attendants to remove passengers with valid boarding passes from their assigned seats." Behind him, Captain Brooks had approached with several other crew members. They watched the exchange with growing alarm. "Well, sir, when there are questions about the legitimacy of a passenger's presence in premium cabins, we are trained to." "What questions?" Malcolm pressed. "What specifically made his presence questionable?" Heather faltered. He's unaccompanied, and it's unusual for." "For what?" Malcolm's voice remained quiet, but his intensity filled the space between them. "For a young black boy to be flying first class alone. Is that the unusual circumstance that triggered your protocol?" The bluntness of his question sent a ripple through the watching passengers. Someone gasped softly. Heather's face flushed. "Sir, I assure you, race had nothing to do with my actions. We have procedures for unaccompanied minors, and my son is 12 years old and fully authorized to fly unaccompanied." His boarding pass was issued correctly, scanned at the gate, and directed him to seat 2A in first class, Malcolm stated flatly. "So I'll ask again, what Skyline Airways protocol justified removing him?" Other crew members were now visibly uncomfortable. A young flight attendant whispered something to Captain Brooks, whose expression grew even more alarmed. "Sir," Heather tried again, "I was simply maintaining first-class standards that our premium passengers expect. Perhaps if you had been traveling with him. So that a standard is that black children don't belong in first class unless accompanied by an adult to, what? Vouch for their legitimacy." Malcolm's calm was terrifying in its control. Captain Brooks stepped forward. "Mr. Williams, on behalf of the entire crew, I want to express our deepest." Heather's head snapped toward the captain, then back to Malcolm, her eyes widening as connections were made. Williams? As in? Malcolm reached into his inner jacket pocket and removed his Skyline Airways founder ID, which he rarely carried but had needed for the board meeting. He held it up without comment. The blood drained from Heather's face as she read the credentials. Malcolm Williams, founder and majority shareholder. "Oh my God," she whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. "Dad owns the airline," Jamal said quietly, speaking for the first time since his father's arrival. Despite everything, there was a hint of pride in his voice. The revelation rippled through the cabin like a shock wave. Passengers who had been pretending not to watch now stared openly. Several reached for their phones. "Mr. Williams, sir," Heather stammered, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was only trying to—" "Captain Brooks," Malcolm interrupted, his gaze never leaving Heather, "I need to speak with you and your senior crew immediately. And I want this documented." "Yes, sir." Right away, the captain responded, gesturing toward the front of the plane. Malcolm looked down at his son, his expression softening. "Are you okay, Jamal?" Jamal nodded, standing straighter now. The shame in his eyes had been replaced with something else, the relief of vindication. "Good," Malcolm said, putting his arm around Jamal's shoulders. "Let's go have that talk with the captain." As they walked back toward the front of the plane, whispers erupted throughout the cabin. "That's the owner. Did she really try to throw out the owner's kid? Oh, she's so fired." Heather remained frozen in place, the full impact of what had just occurred, and what it meant for her career, beginning to sink in. Captain Brooks ushered Malcolm and Jamal into the small private area near the cockpit usually reserved for crew rest. The space was cramped but offered the only privacy available on the aircraft. First Officer Samantha Washington and Cabin Service Director Jerome Thompson joined them, both looking deeply concerned. "Mr. Williams, I cannot begin to express how sorry we are," Captain Brooks began, his normally confident demeanor shaken. "I was completing pre-flight checks and had no idea this was happening." Malcolm nodded curtly, his attention focused on his son. "Jamal, are you truly okay? Don't hold anything back." Jamal took a deep breath, his composure remarkable for a 12-year-old who had just experienced public humiliation. "I'm okay, Dad. Just embarrassed." His voice trembled slightly. "She said, your kind doesn't belong here." The crew members exchanged horrified glances. "She said what?" First Officer Washington asked, her expression darkening. "When she was walking me back to economy, she whispered it," Jamal explained. "I don't think anyone else heard." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I want Ms. Taylor removed from this flight immediately. I also want statements from every crew member and any passengers who witnessed what happened." "Absolutely, sir," Jerome nodded, already pulling out a tablet. "I'll coordinate that right away." "Mr. Williams," Captain Brooks said carefully, "this will delay our departure by at least 30 minutes. Would you prefer we arrange alternative transportation for you and Jamal?" Malcolm looked at his son. "What do you think, Jamal? We could take a later flight or even drive if you prefer." Jamal considered the question seriously. "I think we should stay on this flight," he finally said. "Running away won't change anything." Pride flickered across Malcolm's face. "Then we stay. But I want Ms. Taylor off this plane before we taxi." Jerome excused himself to arrange for Heather's removal and replacement with another flight attendant. Outside the private area, the cabin buzzed with whispers and speculation. Several passengers had already posted about the incident on social media. "I've asked Ms. Rodriguez from Seat 3B to come speak with you," First Officer Washington said. She tried to intervene on Jamal's behalf. A moment later, Lisa Rodriguez was escorted to the private area. She extended her hand to Malcolm. "Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry about what happened to your son. I tried to speak up, but that flight attendant completely ignored me." "Thank you for trying," Malcolm said sincerely. "Would you be willing to provide a statement?" "Absolutely," Lisa nodded firmly. What happened was blatant discrimination, plain and simple. As Lisa gave her account, Jerome returned with news that Heather had been removed from the flight and a replacement was boarding. Andrew Peterson, the businessman who had encouraged Heather's actions, was now attempting to disembark, claiming a sudden business emergency. "Let him go," Malcolm said coolly. "But make sure his name is recorded." After collecting statements and ensuring that the incident was thoroughly documented, Malcolm and Jamal returned to first class. The atmosphere was thick with tension as passengers avoided eye contact, many feeling complicit in their silence during the incident. The replacement flight attendant, a young black woman named Tiana Johnson, approached them with genuine warmth. "Mr. Williams, Jamal, I'm Tiana. I'll be taking care of you for the remainder of the flight. Can I get you anything before we prepare for takeoff?" "Just water for now, thank you," Malcolm replied. As they settled into their seats, Jamal returning to 2A and Malcolm taking 2B, Malcolm turned to his son. "I want you to know something important. What happened today was wrong, but how you handle it matters. You showed tremendous dignity, and I'm proud of you." Jamal nodded, absorbing his father's words. "I tried to remember what you always say, that our response to discrimination says more about us than the discrimination says about them." "That's right. And now we have a choice about how this incident shapes us and the company. This isn't just about one flight attendant with prejudiced views. It's about systems that allow those views to affect how people are treated." Captain Brooks made an announcement apologizing for the delay, and the plane finally began its taxi to the runway. During the flight, Malcolm made several calls to his executive team, instructing them to begin a company-wide review of discrimination complaints and training procedures. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly based on their race? Type number 1 in the comments if you would have spoken up like Lisa, or number 2 if you think most people stay silent out of discomfort. Don't forget to hit that like button if you believe accountability is essential for creating change, and subscribe to hear more stories about confronting discrimination. What do you think happens when corporate leadership is forced to confront racism within their own company? Let's find out as we continue with this powerful story. The sleek glass headquarters of Skyline Airways buzzed with unusual energy for a Friday afternoon. Victoria Reynolds, Chief Operating Officer and Malcolm's most trusted executive, paced her office while juggling calls on her Bluetooth headset. At 48, Victoria had worked alongside Malcolm since the airline's inception, turning down numerous CEO offers from competitors to help build what she considered the most progressive airline in the industry. "No, I need all the reports now, not Monday," she directed, her voice firm but controlled. Every discrimination complaint filed in the last 5 years, whether it was dismissed or not. News of the incident on Flight 237 had reached headquarters before the plane even took off from Atlanta. Victoria had immediately activated the crisis management team while launching her own investigation. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting. "HR Director Franklin is here." Thomas Franklin entered Victoria's office with the confident stride of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. At 56, he'd been brought in during Skyline's acquisition of Regional Airways 3 years ago, part of the executive package Malcolm had reluctantly accepted to close the deal. "Victoria, aren't we overreacting a bit?" Franklin began, settling into a chair without being invited. "From what I gather, this was a simple misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion." Victoria ended her call and fixed Franklin with a steely gaze. A child was publicly humiliated because of his race. That flight attendant told him, and I quote, "Your kind doesn't belong here." Malcolm's son, Thomas. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's exactly the kind of incident that destroys companies. Franklin sighed dramatically. One rogue employee doesn't represent our company culture. We'll issue the standard apology, offer some compensation, and move on. No need to turn this into a crusade. Victoria's assistant entered again, placing a folder on her desk. "The personnel file you requested." "Thank you," Victoria said, opening Heather Taylor's employment record. She scanned it quickly, her expression darkening. 3 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior, all dismissed without investigation. She looked up at Franklin. "Care to explain why?" Franklin shifted uncomfortably. "Those complaints were unsubstantiated. We can't launch a full investigation every time a passenger is unhappy with the service." One complaint was filed by a black flight attendant who reported Taylor for creating a hostile work environment, Victoria read. Another from a Middle Eastern family who were reseated despite having valid first-class tickets. The third from an elderly Asian couple who were ignored throughout a 6-hour flight. She closed the file. "All dismissed by your office with no follow-up." "Victoria, you know how these things go. People play the race card when they don't get the service they expect." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "These things? The race card? Is that the official HR position of Skyline Airways?" Franklin realized his mistake too late. "That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant," Victoria interrupted. "And it explains a lot about why we're in this situation." She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Security, please escort Mr. Franklin to conference room B. He'll be meeting with legal in 30 minutes. As Franklin was led out, Victoria's phone rang. It was Malcolm, just landed in D.C. "We've got bigger problems than one flight attendant," Victoria reported. "Franklin has been burying discrimination complaints. I've already found a pattern." "I suspected as much," Malcolm replied, the sounds of the airport terminal in the background. "I'm staying at the Jefferson with Jamal this weekend as planned, but I need you to handle this, Victoria. Full investigation, no stone unturned." "Already on it." "How's Jamal doing?" There was a pause. "He's stronger than he should have to be at 12. After ending the call, Victoria assembled the executive team in the main conference room. The division was immediate and clear, those who understood the severity of the situation versus those concerned primarily with damage control and public relations. "This isn't just about PR," Victoria stated firmly. "This is about who we are as a company. Malcolm built Skyline with a vision of inclusive travel, and somewhere along the way, we've fallen short." She outlined her plan: a comprehensive audit of every discrimination complaint, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, revised reporting procedures, and a new passenger advocacy position to address concerns from marginalized travelers. "This seems excessive for one incident," the chief financial officer objected. "It wasn't one incident," Victoria countered, displaying the growing file of complaints that had been systematically dismissed. "This was the one that happened to the owner's son. How many others have we ignored?" As the meeting concluded, Victoria's assistant rushed in. Ma'am, it's starting to hit social media. A passenger posted about it, and it's gaining traction with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. Victoria nodded grimly. Issue our preliminary statement acknowledging the incident and affirming our commitment to investigating fully. Make it clear that we take this seriously and will be transparent about our findings and actions. That evening, Malcolm called in from his hotel room while Jamal showered. How bad is it? He asked. It's escalating quickly, Victoria admitted. But we're staying ahead of it. I've placed Franklin on administrative leave pending investigation. The preliminary audit doesn't look good, Malcolm. We've got at least 27 discrimination complaints that were improperly dismissed in the last year alone. Malcolm was silent for a moment. When I started this airline, I wanted to create a different kind of travel experience. One where everyone was treated with dignity. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We'll get it back, Victoria promised. Starting now. The Jefferson Hotel's presidential suite normally served as a sanctuary for Malcolm during his DC trips, a place where he could decompress from the pressures of running an airline empire. Tonight, however, luxury brought no comfort as he watched Jamal picking at his room service dinner, appetite gone. You need to eat something, son, Malcolm encouraged gently. Jamal nodded absently, taking a small bite of his burger before setting it down again. I keep thinking about the way everyone looked at me, he finally said, his voice small. Like I was doing something wrong just by being there. Malcolm moved to sit beside his son on the sofa. What happened today wasn't about you. It was about their prejudice, their inability to see beyond their own narrow expectations. But it felt about me, Jamal insisted. Very personally about me. Malcolm recognized the truth in his son's words. All his success, all his wealth and power, hadn't been enough to shield Jamal from the reality of being black in America. The thought sent a wave of parental guilt washing over him. I should have been on that original flight with you, Malcolm admitted. I thought giving you independence was the right move, but I put you in a vulnerable position. It's not your fault, Dad, Jamal said with a maturity beyond his years. And honestly, it wasn't the first time something like this happened. Malcolm went still. What do you mean? Jamal looked down at his hands. Remember when I went to science camp last summer? The counselor assumed I was there on scholarship and kept asking what program had sent me. Or at school, when Mrs. Harrington was surprised I knew all the answers in advanced math and suggested maybe I was better suited for the regular class. Each example landed like a physical blow. Malcolm had been so focused on creating opportunities for his son that he'd missed the discrimination Jamal was already facing. Why didn't you tell me? Malcolm asked softly. Jamal shrugged. You're always so busy, and I didn't want you to worry. You already have so much pressure on you. The innocence of the answer broke something open in Malcolm's heart. Jamal, nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to me than you. I always have time for what matters, and nothing matters more than your well-being. They stayed up late talking, really talking, for the first time in months. Malcolm realized how much he'd missed in his drive to build his company. How many small moments of his son's life had slipped by while he focused on the big picture. The next morning, determined to salvage their trip, they headed to the National Air and Space Museum as planned. As they explored the exhibits, Malcolm noticed Jamal's excitement gradually returning, especially when they reached the modern aviation section featuring a Skyline Airways model. That's our plane, Dad, Jamal said, a hint of pride returning to his voice. It sure is, Malcolm agreed, slipping an arm around his son's shoulders. As they examined the exhibit, a tall man in a pilot's uniform approached them. "Excuse me," he said. "Aren't you Malcolm Williams?" Malcolm nodded, instantly protective of their privacy. "Captain James Thompson," the man introduced himself with a warm smile. "I'm a pilot with United, but I have to say, what you've built with Skyline is revolutionary. And this must be your son." "Jamal Williams," Jamal introduced himself, shaking the pilot's hand with newfound confidence. "You interested in aviation, young man?" Captain Thompson asked. "Yes, sir. I want to be a pilot or an aerospace engineer." Captain Thompson's face lit up. "Well, let me tell you something. When I started flying 30 years ago, I was often the only black pilot in the room. Sometimes still am. People didn't expect to see someone who looked like me in the cockpit." As Thompson shared stories of his own experiences with discrimination and how he persevered, Malcolm watched his son absorbing every word. The connection between them was immediate and powerful, 2 generations of black men navigating spaces not designed with them in mind. "The sky belongs to all of us," Thompson concluded. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." After exchanging contact information with the captain, who offered to mentor Jamal, they continued their tour with renewed energy. "Dad," Jamal said thoughtfully as they examined a space shuttle exhibit, "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday." "What about it?" Malcolm asked. "Maybe we could use it to make things better. Not just punish that flight attendant, but actually change things." Malcolm looked at his son with surprise and pride. "What kind of changes are you thinking?" "Well," Jamal began, his confidence building, "what if all flight attendants had to go through special training about bias? And what if there was a way for passengers to report problems that didn't get ignored? And maybe have more diverse people working on the planes?" Malcolm listened with growing admiration as his 12-year-old son outlined ideas that his executive team should have implemented years ago. "Those are excellent suggestions," Malcolm said sincerely. "Would you mind if I took some notes? I think these could really help the company." For the first time since the incident, Jamal smiled broadly. "Really? You'd use my ideas?" "Absolutely. In fact," Malcolm said, pulling out his phone, "I'm going to email these to Victoria right now. If you're okay with it, I'd like to credit you as the source." Jamal nodded eagerly, and as Malcolm typed the email, he realized something profound had shifted between them. His son wasn't just the recipient of his protection anymore, he was becoming a partner in creating change. Throughout the remainder of their weekend, their conversations evolved. They discussed Malcolm's vision for Skyline Airways, Jamal's experiences at school, and how they could both use their positions to address discrimination more broadly. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," Malcolm said on their last night in D.C., "most kids your age would have just wanted to forget what happened. But you're looking for solutions. That's real leadership." "I learned it from you, Dad," Jamal replied, the bond between them stronger than ever before. By Monday morning, the incident had exploded across social media platforms. The hashtags #FlyingWhileBlack and #SkylineDiscrimination were trending nationally, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination during air travel. What had begun as one passenger's social media post had catalyzed a national conversation about race and privilege in commercial aviation. Malcolm and Jamal returned to Atlanta to find the company in the midst of a full-blown crisis. The lobby of Skyline headquarters was crowded with reporters, while Victoria had converted the main conference room into a command center. "It's gotten bigger than we anticipated," Victoria explained as she updated Malcolm. "Several civil rights organizations have reached out, including the National Coalition for Transportation Equity. They want to meet with you." Malcolm nodded, reviewing the social media reports on the screens around the room. Set it up. This isn't just about us anymore. This is an industry problem that's been ignored too long. What surprised Malcolm most was the flood of testimonials from other black passengers detailing similar experiences, not just on Skyline, but on every major carrier. Stories of being questioned about first-class tickets, watched suspiciously by flight attendants, or subjected to random, additional screening at alarming rates. We've identified 234 discrimination complaints that were improperly dismissed over the past 3 years, Victoria reported. Franklin was systematically burying them to keep our metrics looking good. Malcolm's expression hardened. Where are we with the immediate changes? Mandatory anti-bias training is being implemented immediately for all customer-facing staff, Victoria replied. We've created a new reporting system that bypasses local management. The passenger advocacy position has been posted, and we've already received over 300 applications. Good. What about Taylor and Peterson? Heather Taylor has been suspended pending termination proceedings. She's hired an attorney, but the evidence is overwhelming. Andrew Peterson has been added to our no-fly list, and his company has publicly distanced themselves from his actions. Malcolm turned to Jamal, who had been quietly observing the command center operations. What do you think of all this? Jamal considered the question with the seriousness Malcolm had come to expect from him. I think it's good that changes are happening, but sad that it took this to make people listen. The wisdom in those words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Over the next several days, Malcolm divided his time between managing the crisis and implementing substantive changes. He took Jamal's suggestions seriously, incorporating them into the company's reform plans, which soon became known internally as the Williams Protocol. Lisa Rodriguez, the passenger who had tried to intervene during the incident, was invited to join Skyline's newly formed passenger advocacy team. Her background in customer experience and strong moral compass made her an ideal candidate. I never expected a job offer to come from this, Lisa admitted during her orientation. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to help prevent what happened to Jamal from happening to others. The incident that could have been devastating for Skyline Airways was instead becoming a catalyst for industry-wide examination. Malcolm's decision to address the issue transparently rather than minimize it resonated with travelers tired of corporate doublespeak. We made mistakes, Malcolm stated plainly in a press conference that week. And while I'm deeply disturbed that my son had to experience discrimination on my own airline, I'm committed to using this incident as a turning point, not just for Skyline, but for commercial aviation as a whole. The frankness of his approach earned respect from unlikely quarters. Competitors who had initially hoped to capitalize on Skyline's PR disaster instead found themselves facing questions about their own diversity practices and complaint handling procedures. Malcolm established the Williams Foundation for Inclusive Transportation with a personal donation of $10 million, dedicated to addressing discrimination across all modes of public transit. He also created a scholarship program for minority youth interested in aviation careers. Dad, can I help design the training program? Jamal asked one evening as they reviewed the foundation plans. I think it would help if flight attendants heard directly from kids about how it feels to be treated differently. Malcolm looked at his son with newfound respect. That's brilliant, Jamal. A youth perspective is exactly what's missing. Together, they developed a video component for the training featuring young people of various backgrounds sharing their experiences with discrimination. Jamal's contribution became known as the Youth Perspective Module, and would eventually be adopted by 4 other major airlines. Thomas Franklin resigned rather than face termination, while several of his allies in middle management were reassigned or let go as the investigation revealed the extent of the problem. Victoria oversaw a complete restructuring of the Human Resources Department, implementing new guidelines for handling discrimination complaints. 3 weeks after the incident, Malcolm received a call from the CEO of Global Airlines, Skyline's largest competitor. "Williams, I have to hand it to you," the competitor admitted grudgingly. "You've turned what could have been a company killer into a leadership position. Our board is pressuring us to adopt similar practices." "This shouldn't be a competitive issue," Malcolm replied. "Treating people with dignity isn't proprietary. Feel free to adopt any of our protocols." By the end of the month, Skyline's bookings had not only recovered but increased, particularly among minority travelers who appreciated the company's forthright response. What could have destroyed the airline had instead strengthened its brand as a leader in corporate responsibility. For Malcolm, however, the most significant impact wasn't on the company's bottom line or public image, it was the transformation he witnessed in Jamal. His son had emerged from the ordeal not as a victim, but as an advocate with a powerful voice and growing confidence in using it. 3 months after the incident, Skyline Airways had undergone a transformation that extended far beyond policy changes and press releases. The company culture had shifted in tangible ways, with employees at all levels embracing the new direction or finding themselves increasingly out of place. Heather Taylor's termination proceedings concluded with her dismissal for violating multiple company policies. Despite initial threats of litigation, the overwhelming evidence, including her own "your kind doesn't belong here" comment, made her position indefensible. Her union declined to represent her after reviewing the evidence. "I never meant it the way it sounded," Heather insisted during her final hearing. It was about his age, not his race. The review board, newly diverse after Victoria's restructuring, was unmoved. "Your pattern of behavior with other minority passengers contradicts that claim," the chairperson noted. Skyline Airways no longer has room for employees who cannot treat all passengers with equal respect. For Heather, the consequences extended beyond losing her job. Her name and face had become synonymous with discrimination in the aviation industry, making future employment in the field unlikely. The viral nature of the incident had created a lasting digital footprint that would follow her for years. Thomas Franklin fared no better. His resignation hadn't protected him from the fallout once the extent of his complicity became public. The systematic dismissal of discrimination complaints under his watch had enabled a toxic culture that might otherwise have been addressed years earlier. Franklin essentially created the conditions for this incident to occur, Victoria explained to the executive team. By ignoring clear warning signs and silencing victims, he sent a message that discriminatory behavior would be tolerated. Andrew Peterson, the businessman who had encouraged Heather's actions, discovered that his own company had little tolerance for the negative publicity his behavior generated. After being identified in multiple news reports, he was placed on leave pending an internal investigation and eventually asked to resign. "Actions have consequences," Malcolm observed when informed of Peterson's fate. "Especially when those actions contribute to the humiliation of a child." While those who had perpetuated discrimination faced appropriate consequences, those who had stood against it found new opportunities. Lisa Rodriguez thrived in her role on the passenger advocacy team, quickly rising to lead the department. Her willingness to speak up when others remained silent made her an ideal champion for vulnerable travelers. "What we're finding," Lisa reported during a quarterly review, "is that many incidents went unreported because passengers didn't believe anything would change. Now that they see we take action, reports have increased by 300%. This transparency allowed Skyline to address problems that had festered unseen for years. From accessibility issues for disabled passengers to religious accommodations for employees, the company began tackling challenges across the spectrum of inclusivity. The comprehensive audit Victoria had initiated revealed that discrimination hadn't been limited to passenger experiences. Minority employees had faced barriers to promotion, unequal discipline practices, and higher rates of termination than their white counterparts. Armed with this data, Skyline implemented corrective measures throughout its operations. Captain Daniel Brooks, who had been horrified by the incident on Flight 237, became an unexpected ally in the transformation. As a senior pilot with 2 decades at the airline, his endorsement carried weight with colleagues who might otherwise have resisted change. "I've been flying these skies for 20 years, Brooks told a gathering of pilots and crew members, deliberately echoing Heather's words from that day. "And I know when something isn't right. What happened to Jamal Williams wasn't right, and I'm ashamed I didn't create a culture in my crew that would have prevented it." The Williams Protocol, that had begun with Jamal's suggestions, evolved into a comprehensive framework for addressing bias and promoting inclusion throughout the company. Its success attracted attention from other industries facing similar challenges, with Malcolm frequently invited to share Skyline's experience at corporate conferences. For Jamal, returning to school after the incident brought mixed emotions. While some classmates treated him with new respect after seeing his father on national news, others seemed uncomfortable around him, as if his experience had somehow changed his identity in their eyes. "People look at me differently now," Jamal confided to his father. "Like they're waiting to see if I'll call them racist for normal stuff. That's part of the burden of becoming a symbol," Malcolm explained. "But remember, you're still just Jamal, a kid who loves planes and math and basketball. Don't let this incident define you." Taking his father's advice to heart, Jamal channeled his energy into positive action. He organized a diversity awareness club at his school and began speaking to youth groups about standing up to discrimination. What could have diminished him instead became a source of purpose and strength. The foundation Malcolm had established awarded its first scholarships to minority students pursuing aviation careers, creating a pipeline of diverse talent for the industry's future. Among the recipients was a young woman whose mother had been denied a flight attendant position at another airline 30 years earlier due to her race. "My mother's dream is finally coming true through me," the young woman said at the award ceremony, her words capturing the generational impact of both discrimination and its remedies. As public interest in the incident gradually waned, the internal changes at Skyline Airways continued with unwavering commitment. The quarterly diversity reports Victoria instituted showed steady improvement across all metrics, from hiring practices to passenger satisfaction among minority travelers. "We're not just fixing a PR problem," Malcolm reminded his executive team regularly. "We're building the airline we always claimed to be." 1 year after the incident that had shaken Skyline Airways to its core, Malcolm and Jamal Williams once again prepared to board a flight to Washington, D.C. This time, they walked through Atlanta International Airport together, both acutely aware of how much had changed since that fateful day. The terminal itself looked different. New signage in multiple languages welcomed travelers, while the customer service desks were now staffed with visibly diverse teams. At security, TSA agents received travelers with standardized greetings and procedures, regardless of appearance or ticket class. "I'm nervous," Jamal admitted as they approached the Skyline Airways gate. At 13 now, he had grown taller and carried himself with newfound confidence, but the memory of his last solo flight remained vivid. "That's natural," Malcolm assured him. "But remember, this isn't the same airline anymore. In many ways, you helped transform it." The gate area reflected those transformations. Digital screens displayed the company's inclusivity commitment in rotating messages. The gate agents, representing various backgrounds, greeted each passenger with consistent professionalism. Small details, from the magazines available in the waiting area to the artwork on the walls, subtly communicated that all travelers were valued. As they boarded, the lead flight attendant recognized Malcolm immediately. "Mr. Williams, Jamal, welcome aboard. Captain Brooks asked me to let you know he's piloting today and would love for Jamal to visit the cockpit before takeoff." Jamal's eyes lit up. "Really? I can go to the cockpit?" "Absolutely," she smiled. The captain mentioned something about a future pilot needing to see the controls up close. Inside the aircraft, the changes were equally apparent. The crew moved through the cabin with attentive efficiency, treating each passenger with the same level of respect. New training protocols were evident in their interactions: no assumptions, no preferential treatment, just consistent service delivered with genuine warmth. Captain Brooks greeted Jamal like an old friend when he entered the cockpit. "There he is, the young man who changed Skyline Airways forever. Come see what you'll be flying someday." As Brooks explained the instrument panel and flight procedures, Malcolm watched his son's face glow with excitement. This was the experience Jamal should have had a year ago, being treated not as an intruder but as a welcome guest full of potential. When they returned to their first-class seats, an elderly black couple across the aisle smiled at them. The gentleman leaned over once they were settled. "Excuse me, aren't you Malcolm Williams?" he asked. When Malcolm nodded, the man extended his hand. "James Washington. I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done with this airline. My wife and I have been flying for 50 years, and the change is remarkable." "I appreciate that, but my son deserves most of the credit," Malcolm replied, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. Mrs. Washington smiled warmly at Jamal. "Then we thank you, young man. When I started flying in the 1960s, I wasn't allowed in first class at all, no matter how much money I had. Some days it feels like nothing changes, and then something happens that pushes everything forward." As the plane took off, Malcolm reflected on that perspective. Progress wasn't a straight line but a series of painful reckonings followed by transformative action. The incident with Jamal had been one such reckoning, forcing not just Skyline Airways but the entire industry to confront uncomfortable truths. Midway through the flight, Malcolm was asked to say a few words to the crew during their break. Standing in the galley with Jamal beside him, he looked at the diverse faces watching him attentively. "1 year ago, a flight attendant told my son that his kind didn't belong in first class," Malcolm began, his voice steady. "Today, I want to acknowledge that the changes you've all embraced aren't just about avoiding incidents like that. They're about creating a company where everyone truly belongs, passengers and employees alike." He gestured to Jamal. "My son could have walked away from that experience bitter and angry. Instead, he helped design the very training program many of you have completed. The Williams Protocol exists because a 13-year-old believed things could be better." After landing in D.C., they were surprised to find a small ceremony waiting at the gate. Skyline's new Vice President of Inclusive Practices, Victoria Reynolds' new role after her promotion, stood with a group of graduating flight attendants from the latest training class. "Mr. Williams, Jamal, we hoped you'd be on this flight," Victoria smiled. "Our newest team members are the first full class to complete the comprehensive training program Jamal helped design. They specifically requested that he say a few words at their graduation." Though initially nervous, Jamal stepped forward with poise beyond his years. "When I was removed from my seat last year, I felt alone and humiliated," he told the attentive graduates. "I don't want any passenger to ever feel that way again. You have the power to make everyone feel welcome, to show them they belong. That's not just good customer service, it's human dignity." The simplicity and power of his message brought tears to several eyes. After the ceremony, one of the new flight attendants, a young black man who had previously been rejected by 3 other airlines, approached Jamal. "You're the reason I'm here," he said quietly. "When I saw your story, I thought maybe things were finally changing. Thank you for speaking up." Throughout the industry, the ripple effects continued to spread. Other airlines, initially defensive about Skyline's public stance on discrimination, had gradually adopted similar measures as they recognized both the moral imperative and business advantages of inclusive practices. The Williams Protocol had become a recognized standard in transportation equity, with elements adopted by bus companies, cruise lines, and even rideshare services. What had begun as one company's crisis response had evolved into an industry benchmark. For Malcolm, however, the most meaningful outcome wasn't measured in policy changes or industry recognition, but in the transformation he witnessed in his son. Jamal had discovered his voice and purpose through adversity, emerging not as a victim but as a catalyst for change. 6 months later, Malcolm watched proudly as Jamal took the controls of Skyline's new flight simulator, a gift for his 14th birthday. With Captain Brooks guiding him, Jamal navigated a virtual takeoff with the focused determination that characterized everything he did. "He's a natural," Brooks commented as Jamal executed a perfect climb. "Got the Williams determination." Malcolm nodded, throat tight with emotion. "He's going to soar higher than I ever dreamed." As father and son left the simulator facility, they passed the wall displaying Skyline's updated mission statement, prominently featuring a quote from Jamal, "The sky belongs to everyone." In that moment, Malcolm knew that the painful incident a year and a half earlier had not diminished his son but elevated him, teaching him that speaking truth to power could transform not just a company but an entire industry. The humiliation Jamal had experienced had been converted into empowerment, not just for him but for countless others who would never know his name but would benefit from his courage. "Ready to fly home?" Malcolm asked, arm around his son's shoulders. Jamal looked up with a confident smile. "Always ready, Dad. The sky's waiting for us." This powerful story teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both individual courage and systemic action. Jamal's experience shows that even a single incident can expose deeper institutional problems that affect countless others. True change demands not just acknowledging discrimination but implementing concrete solutions with accountability. The Williams family demonstrates that responding to racism with dignity doesn't mean accepting it. Instead, it means channeling that pain into meaningful transformation. Malcolm could have simply fired one employee, but he recognized the opportunity to address the root causes within his entire organization. Every person has a role to play in fighting discrimination. Lisa spoke up when others remained silent. Captain Brooks acknowledged his responsibility to create an inclusive culture. Victoria pursued systemic changes rather than quick fixes. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that our voices matter. Jamal turned his humiliation into empowerment not just for himself but for an entire industry. His willingness to share his experience created ripples that improved conditions for thousands of travelers he would never meet. When we witness discrimination, our response defines us. Will we be silent bystanders, or will we have the courage to stand up and create change? Have you ever stood up against discrimination or witnessed someone else doing so? How did it impact the situation? Share your story in the comments below. If this account of courage and transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful racism stories that inspire change. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs encouragement to use their voice against injustice. Thank you for joining our community of changemakers. Together, we can transform painful experiences into powerful progress.